Recording in progress.
So I think, can anybody please make a recording of this, apart from the recording that will come up automatically? Okay. So let's see, it should come up with a message to, let's see if I do. Yeah.
Oh, there's somebody entered the waiting room.
Okay, you,
Hugo from Benson.
admit. Hello, Grant. Let's see if the audio is right. Allora, Grant Benson, qua. Thing. Admit myself. Wait a second, because I don't have the sound yet.
Okay.
Recording in progress.
Okay, now I said, wait a second, because I okay. And next to my mic, right?
Yeah.
How do I close? Can you please the sound of this sound? And then put the video.
Okay.
You did?
Here
Okay,
you
good.
go.
Put the camera on so we can see you.
Oh, para.
Okay, good.
There you go.
Okay. Can you see and hear us, Grant?
I can hear you and see you. Can you hear me?
Great. Yeah, very well, very well.
Like returning from shift.
So finally, we have somebody that speaks good English, because I've interviewed. I had many Italian journalists join us, and they couldn't. So it was a problem.
I hope I don't let you down with my English this afternoon.
That's impossible.
Anyway.
So we have 40 minutes in the Zoom call. If it ends, I will continue with the WhatsApp, because it's limited to 40 minutes. But so let's
Fine.
go to introduce yourself, and that's the first question, please.
Okay, so hello, thank you very much. So our first question is that everybody knows you since you're so popular, but if you had to introduce yourself to somebody that doesn't know you, how would you describe yourself?
Okay, well, thank you. I'm very flattered, first of all. Thank you for that question. Beautifully phrased. You'll make a wonderful political journalist with a question that opens like that. How would I introduce myself? Somebody that got very, very lucky. I think is perhaps the best way of doing it. My name is Grant. I work in radio. I have worked in radio for the last 40 years. It's the only thing I've ever done. It's the only thing I know how to do. And what I would say is that I was very lucky to have worked for some very famous radio stations right at the very beginning of my career. And I think that was a massive advantage, because if you, just by sheer luck, you start at the top, then I found that other doors opened much more easily. If you can say that you come from a famous radio station, let's make a French example here, EDJ, then everybody else wants to speak to you, because they know that you've started at the top. I was very lucky to start at Radio Caroline, which is basically more or less where I started, because I had some friends there and blah 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 and all the rest of it. But so yes, how would I introduce myself? Yeah, somebody who was very lucky, who spent all his career working in radio. Excuse me. Enjoyed every minute of it, still enjoying every minute of it. I make no secret of the fact that I turned 61 a couple of weeks ago, and I have no intentions of retiring. So yeah, very lucky, somebody who's spent all his time working in radio and that still loves radio, enjoys watching the metamorphosis, the evolving of the situation, which is very rapid of late. But yeah, somebody who's very lucky. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Number two, it was yours, I think, right?
So we also want to know, why did this movement of pirate station was born? Did you realize how historically significant this pirate radio would be?
How was it born? It was born simply because in the early part of the 60s, when Radio Caroline was born, there was only state-run radio. There was the BBC, which had a total monopoly of broadcasting in the United Kingdom at the time. And there was a very young impresario, to use an Italian word, which we use in English as well, who worked in the music business, who had an artist that he wanted to promote on the radio. But there was only one radio station that didn't have a great deal of time for pop music or rock music at the time. And so with that kind of naivety that comes with being very young, he thought, well, hang on a minute, if the radio stations won't play my song, I'll make my own radio station. Now, obviously, the law, we're talking about the early 60s here, the law in the UK, as in most places in Europe, didn't permit private radio stations. And so the only way to start a private radio station was to do it outside officially of the United Kingdom, outside of the territorial waters of the United Kingdom. And so he bought this ship, put it outside of the UK jurisdiction, and then broadcast. The Radio Caroline was born in 1964. I was born in 1963. So I can't say that I lived, obviously, the early days of Radio Caroline. In answer to the second part of your question, though, whether people understood the magnitude, if you like, of what they were doing at the time, I find that hard to believe. I don't think so. I think it was a lot of youthful young people's naivety when you think that everything is, quite rightly, you think that everything is possible, that nothing is impossible. Then they just started it. They said, "Hang on, I need a radio station. I'm going to start a radio station." There was no, when you get older, you think things, you think about things too much. You don't react out of instinct, if you like. You don't just sort of go, as we say in English, with your gut feeling. I'm just going to do it, and who cares what happens? So yeah, I think that's certainly how Caroline started, how the pirate radio movement started in the UK. Whether they realised what they were doing was going to be so massive, and that we would still be talking about it. What is it now? 60 years later, nearly. I don't think anybody believed that was the case. Now, I don't know. I could be wrong, but I don't know.
Next is from you. Okay.
So you've mentioned, but it's interesting to explain to people today, why in that particular period did democracies, or could democracies outlaw people for playing music? Because as you mentioned, it was illegal to have a private radio. Why they could outlaw people for playing music, and where the personal risks that you had in participating and being involved in a pirate station?
Okay. It's interesting. I think we really have to go back to the very early days of the BBC in the, correct me if I'm wrong here, I think we're looking at the sort of the late 20s, early 30s, 1930s. It was set up by a guy called Lord Reith. And the fundamental idea behind the BBC, behind broadcasting, was, I think it was to inform, educate, and entertain, in that order. Informing people was the most important thing they did. Educating them was the second most important thing. And the third, it was very much a, you guys probably realize as much as anything the sort of the power that medium can have, even in these days. I mean, we're looking at what's happening in the United States. They're very concerned about TikTok. They're thinking of outlawing it, possibly for slightly different reasons. But media is still today a very, very powerful way of controlling people, for want of a better term. We look at advertising. Although we may not realize it, often it makes us make purchases that we perhaps wouldn't make if, we drink Coca-Cola and you will become young, blonde, and 6 foot tall and what have you. That's basically the message behind a lot of advertising. And media is obviously a part of advertising. Media is a form of advertising. And so I think governments at the time were concerned that that somebody, who wasn't actually part of the establishment, if you want to use that term, could have that sort of control over public opinion. It's about social control to a degree. I don't want to sound too much of a conspiracy theorist here, but I think there is an element of that involved. People, the governments of the time, right over Europe, and you have to look at sort of, should we say, the more totalitarian states, should we say the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc before the fall of the Berlin Wall. Obviously, radio and television was state controlled there, as was the case as a lot of South American countries too. To the second part of your question, was there a risk involved? Yes, there was. The main risk was being caught, and it did actually happen to me. I went to Radio Caroline for the first time, I think it was in 1984. I spent about 2 months on board the ship, and when I left the ship, the little boat that was supposed to take me back to the UK, take me back to England, was intercepted by the police. I was arrested. It's quite ironic here. We're looking at 1984, so what's that, 40 years ago. And I was arrested with the charge of being an illegal immigrant. I mean, there's nobody more British looking on the face of this earth than me. With my London accent, but it was something. Yeah, exactly. I come from Sangatte or somewhere like that. And so they arrested me with being an illegal immigrant. They put me in a little cell for a few hours. And then afterwards, I was 20 at the time, 21, something like that. Then afterwards, they said, "No, hang on, we believe that you were working for Radio Caroline." And I said, "Well, hang on a minute. I was very much a sort of, a teenage lawyer. I'd watched too much television. I used to say to people, hang on a minute. First, I said to the police, they were very nice to me. I said to them, hang on, first you've arrested me with being an illegal immigrant. Now you're arresting me with working for an offshore radio station, a pirate radio station. I think perhaps I should talk to some independent, get some independent advice before I make any statements." And I think they were quite impressed with this. When you're 20, you're not frightened of anybody. And so they said, "Yeah, okay, we'll let you go. Don't do it again." I did. I went back, and I was fortunately never caught again. That was the one and only time. So yes, a little bit of risk involved there was.
Sorry if I interrupted with a question. At the time when the pirate station were, there was this law against the pirate station. It was a Labour government. Was this just a Labour thing, or was it the entire UK Parliament?
I think, to be honest, I don't think it was a Labour thing. Obviously, people have said that it was kind of a more left-leaning. Admittedly, yes, the government of the time was left-leaning, but it also changed. The Conservative government came in the 70s. You correct me here a little bit wrong. I think it was a government thing. I don't think there was much philosophy. Having said that, now I backtrack a little bit here. When the Conservative government came in the early part of the 70s in the UK, they did introduce commercial radio, but it was very, very, excuse me, hit the microphone, but it was very, very limited. It was very controlled commercial radio. And it was very much put into the hands of the establishment. Just about all the concessions, all the licenses for commercial radio were given to people that already owned newspapers. We call them the press barons in the United Kingdom. People like Lord Beaverbrook, who had a couple of newspapers, the people that were behind the Times. And so it was very much maintaining a kind of status quo, even though they were private, at least on paper. It wasn't the case of anybody that could sort of put a few £1,000s together could open up a radio station. It was very, very heavily controlled private radio, at least initially.
Thank you. Who's next?
The next question is nice and simple, really. What was your favorite moment while you were on board?
Yeah, that's my favorite moment. Obviously I'm looking back on something that was an important part of my formative years as a youngster, but if I'm absolutely totally honest with you guys, the real abiding memory that you have, you've got to admit, you've got to understand it was a fairly small ship. We're not talking about a cruise ship or anything like that. And there were what, 15 to 20 guys, nearly always male, have to be honest with you, stuck in the North Sea in the middle of January and February. The abiding memory, the thing, it was the boredom, to be honest, a lot of times. Because don't forget, we're talking about a period there was no emails, there was no cell phones, no internet, etc., etc. The only sort of contact we had with land was once every week or two, when a little boat would clandestinely come alongside with the mail, as in newspaper, as in post, and let us know what was happening. So we had no contact, if you like, with our audience, no direct contact like you have today with SMS and WhatsApp and all the rest of it. The best memories, I mean, I think that to look at the more positive angle, the best memory is probably some of the friendships that were formed out there. You know, I was a youngster, and you know, the people that I was involved with at the time are still very, very good friends. I was talking to a couple of them, you know, just before I came online with you guys. There was, from a more professional point of view, it was quite an interesting time musically. There was some new bands that were coming out that are old bands now, of course. U2, Simple Minds, Bronski Beat Communards, a lot of new music, which you know, as youngsters we were all into. So yeah, some of the best times was playing these records for the very first time. I always remember something that I like to talk about was David Bowie came out with a new LP at the time, which had that track Blue Jean, and he was a big fan of Radio Caroline, Bowie, and he sent out a cassette copy of it so that we could play it first before the state stations, before BBC Radio 1 and stations like that. So those are the kind of memories. Most of the time, the sea conditions were horrific out there. We were not talking about the Mediterranean and Nice. We're talking about the Mar du Nord, the North Sea, which obviously, you know, frequently had storms and what have you. But there once or twice we would have these really flat, calm seas when the sea itself looked like glass. And I've still got some of those images in my head of the few occasions that happened. But yeah, probably the best memory, discovering some new music and making a lot of friends that, you know, are still friends to this day.
Can I just ask a question, sort of backtracking to the
Sure.
personal risks involved? Do you reckon you consciously or maybe subconsciously changed your voice while you were speaking on air?
Yes. When I was a kid, when I was a youngster, as opposed to today, it's certainly in the UK. We have this thing. It's called RP, received pronunciation, which is a typical BBC kind of accent. You know, sort of how now brown cow, daddy's car's a Jaguar, and pa drives rather fast. And I came from sort of a very working class background, I've got to be honest with you. And at the time, to get into broadcasting, you had to have that kind of accent. And yeah, so certainly I worked on it. I was whether consciously, subconsciously, probably consciously, but I will never admit to it. Does that answer your question? And yeah, also the disc jockeys when I was a kid in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, they all had massive, you know, big deep voices like this, and I wasn't really that way at all. Nowadays, it's much better. You turn on the radio and you get sort of all different kind of voice. I don't really know what the situation's like in France, but certainly I can talk a little bit about Italy. Italy had this sort of strange kind of division where the state radio and television all came out of Rome, and so they had a lot of Roman accents, whereas the private sector was all based in Milan. So at least initially they had sort of northern Lombardy accents. I think Marco will back me up on this one. And the similar situation was in the UK. You had to have a London accent to get onto the radio. Nowadays, that's not the case. In fact, it's certainly in the BBC, they actively look for local accents, but that wasn't the case when I was young. So yeah, I'm just, the simple answer to your question is yes.
Next.
So based on what you said before, you said that you had many friends, bands, artists. So we were wondering, so what was the best interview you had with an artist? What was the worst? And if at any case during an interview, you changed your opinion about an artist you were going to interview?
The first interview. I think probably
The best
yeah,
and
Sorry?
I think the question is the best.
The best and the worst. Yeah, okay. Oh dear. Let me give you a bit of background. I had this, I moved to Milan, I think it was in 1985. And I was lucky because obviously I'm, a native English speaker and all the rest of it. So I got given all the interviews. And so I did so many. Sometimes it was almost like a conveyor belt. I would be running around Milan with a portable tape recorder at the time, doing so many interviews. And I must admit, I've actually, some of them I've forgotten about. Okay, the worst, it's which is actually one of the fun. Okay, yeah, there's a couple that can fall into sort of the worst or the most amusing category. I'll let you decide. You probably know a guy. Actually, he lives actually not far from you. Julian Lennon. He lives in Monaco. He's the son, of course, of John Lennon. John Lennon, as you know, was assassinated in New York, who was shot in New York. So you know that. Bear that fact in mind, because that fact is very important with the rest of the story that I'm about to tell you. Now, John Lennon's son, Julian, he had a minor hit in around Europe. I think we're looking for about the early part of the 90s here. So I went to Milan to interview him at the Virgin Records, the record company that he was recording for at the time. And we got on really well because he's exactly my age. And so we were talking about this, that, and the other. It didn't seem like an interview at all. It seemed just like sort of talking to a friend in the bar. And I remember it was the middle of the summer, and all the doors and all the windows were open. And at a certain point during the interview, one of the doors slammed shut with a really loud bang. And I said to Julian, oh, they must have shot somebody. And then I realized what I just said. And I don't think my face has ever been redder in my entire life. He was very gracious. He didn't mention it. He just carried on talking and all the rest of it. And I think that's, that's possibly one of the worst moments. Another slightly, not quite such a bad situation, although professionally not the best of things, was I was interviewing Bon Jovi, again, back in the 90s. And I had a digital tape recorder, a DAT recorder, we called them at the time. And I was, having this great interview talking about their new LP, blah, 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 blah. And then I looked down at the tape recorder and realized that the batteries were flat and I wasn't recording anything. But I didn't dare say anything. I just carried on and, hoped that nobody would notice. So, yeah, those are the worst cases. The best, yeah. Where can I start here? I mean, I've been, as I say, I was lucky. It was not because I'm a particularly good interviewer, but simply because, for linguistic reasons, I got to do all the big ones. I spoke to Mick Jagger, Ringo Starr of the Beatles, Sting. These are probably all names that are going to sound very old to you guys, but to me, obviously they mean a lot. And some of them have developed a little bit into friendships to a degree. Dave Stewart of the Eurythmics. Again, these are names that are going to be old to you, but I saw him actually down in Antibes. Again, going back 30 odd years, and we sort of maintain. I get Christmas cards from him and people like that. So yeah, those are the nice those are the very positive sides. But certainly the Julian Lennon story is one that I still sort of I come out in a cold sweat every time I think about that. It's one of these crazy situations.
Just a curiosity, what do you do when the tape recorder doesn't work? Because it's something that I usually tape with two things, a recorder and a telephone now, but it can still happen that you lose the file or something. What did you do that time?
At that time, I to be honest with you, I can't remember. I think I just carried on with the interview and didn't say anything to anybody. I probably, because I'm obviously the artist, they do thousands of interviews a day, so they don't know what's really going on. I think I probably mentioned it to the record company and apologized profusely. These things happen, but I do remember.
Was that Studio 105 or which station was that?
Sorry, I think it was probably RTL 105. I think so.
What did you do on air? Just
it was a recorded interview, Marco. So I don't remember. We're talking about 30 odd years ago, 25 years ago. I probably they might have sent us what we call in the trade an EPK, an electronic press kit, which are those kind of standard interviews that they send out to shall we say, there's a kind of a pecking order, a chart of, important radio stations, they get one-to-one interviews. Slightly less important interviews, radio stations, they get interviews that are sort of standard. You can insert your own voices into them, and so we were probably given one of those interviews as well to fill up the gap. But as I say, it was quite some time ago. I can't really remember it that well.
Well, next.
No.
Who's next?
Yes. Hello.
Hi.
The next question is a big one. I'm not gonna paraphrase. Do you think that the radio is dying with the advent of the internet?
I think how we perceive radio, yes, it's an evolution. I tell you what, this is something obviously that somebody like myself that was sort of born in the dinosaur age of radio thinks about all the time. We just have to change. Nothing, remains the same. Again, let's go back to the early days of Radio Caroline. In the United Kingdom, there were 3 radio stations. We're talking about the early 60s. Now, on my little mobile phone here, I can probably receive, without an exaggeration, 300,000 radio stations. So, whether that means that they're dying or whether they're just metamorphosizing into something else, I think is the situation. I think it's become a lot harder to do radio today because, I've often said that when I was a kid, my heroes were, well, maybe footballers, singers, artists, rock musicians or actors or what have you, and also disc jockeys. They were all in the mix. Whereas now I don't think anybody would consider, a disc jockey, a speaker on the radio to be an idol anymore. There are too many of us, which is a good and a bad thing. I mean, from the consumer point of view, it's great because whatever kind of music I'm into, I can, dial up on my phone, no problems whatsoever, And of course, we have other services which are also competing for our ears, your various Spotify's and Deezers and what have you. So no, I don't think it's dying. It's just becoming better. It's harder to do, and there's more of it. So I think if you could equate the fact that there is more of it as being a positive aspect, then yeah, there's so much more of it. I think it's harder to make your mark in radio, in that the sort of the cake, should we say the listening cake is divided into ever finer slices. Whereas once upon a time, you were on a radio station, you were a star immediately. Now it's that sort of thing doesn't exist anymore. So no, it's not dying. It's just changing, and it's requiring a lot of work to make sure that you maintain the level, to make sure that you make your voice heard. But it was easier once upon a time, absolutely. Whether it was better then is, of course, open to debate.
This is not one of our official questions, but I just wanted to ask you.
I like the unofficial questions. Those are the best ones.
I just ask you what you're working on now, and what you said you're not looking at retiring anytime soon. So what's going on for you now?
No, I can't afford to retire. That's the real reason. No, what I'm working on. I have to. Okay, I'll give you a bit of some stories here. I was working for a station in just outside of Italy, just outside of Milan, rather, a few years ago, and I was getting to the point where I was thinking of retiring, and I thought, well, hang on a minute, I don't have children and what have you, and I had a little bit of money saved by, so I was going to take a sabbatical year. This is about 4 years ago. And the idea was that me and my girlfriend, we were going to go down to Milan airport. We were going to look at the departure board and say, today we're going to go there. And I was going to do that for a year. And that was this great plan that we had. And then I think about the day after we decided to do this, COVID broke out. And so that rather put a stop to that particular idea. So I live in Switzerland now, just on the border with Italy. And so we were, both of us, me and my girlfriend, locked up in this house with nothing to do all day. And so we decided, well, let's start a radio station. Okay, I had some, basic bits of equipment, basically the equipment that I'm using to talk to you guys now with, and we set up this little radio station, and we called the village I live is called Morcote. It's just outside of Lugano, right on the Italian Swiss border, and we called it Radio Morcote International, and the name itself was a bit of a joke. It's like saying Radio Sofia Antipolis International or something. It's so stupid. And and so we started doing this, and my girlfriend and I, we would go on air just playing our favorite records, getting absolutely totally drunk, right? And we had all these bottles of prosecco all over the place, just talking total rubbish. And we thought that we had about 3 or 4 people listening to us, our friends and what have you, because everybody was in lockdown, everybody was closed in home, and so we thought we had about 3 or 4 people looking. And the disadvantage of internet radio is that you know exactly how many people are listening. So anyway, one day I managed to sort of figure out, wow. And there were hundreds of people listening to us. I know this is crazy, and so we had to throw away all the alcohol and start doing it seriously. Then the local press started getting interested. Who are these crazy kids, stuck in their little flat in Morcote, doing a radio? And the Swiss television came round. The Swiss state television. They came round. They started doing filming us while we were on air. Then the press came around, and the whole thing totally exploded. Something that was supposed to be sort of just a way of passing the time during lockdown became a little bit of what we say in English, a cottage industry, a little business, and it's still running to this day. So if you like to listen to Radio Marcotte International, find us on your local radio apps. But, and then one of the official stations here in Switzerland, they called up and said, hang on a minute, you live just around the corner from us. Why don't you come and do a program for us? I said, yeah, okay, I'll come and do a program for you. And then the television station around the corner said, hey, Grant, come and do a program for us. I said, all right, yeah, I'll come and do a program for you as well. Then one of the companies that I worked for in Milan, RTL Radio, they said, hey, come and do a program for us. And so now the situation is, whereas previously I was thinking of doing nothing for a year, I don't think I've ever worked this hard in my entire life. And I have to be honest with you, though, I love this unofficial question because it gives me a chance to say that this has possibly been the best time of my life professionally as well, because I've got to be honest with you, when you get to a certain point, you don't have to prove anything to anyone anymore. When you're 30, you're always looking over your shoulder, hoping that you're a little bit better than everybody else, and you're pushing. When you get to sort of the age that I am, you don't give a damn anymore. You just do it, and of course, so you enjoy it a lot more as well. So yeah, those are basically the projects that I'm doing at the moment. I work for Teleticino, I work for Radio 3i, I work for RTL, and we also have our little wonderful Radio Morcotte International, which is going really well. So yeah, thank you for that question. It gives me a chance to promote myself.
Is there another one? Yeah.
We
So
have-
we will try to stay in the 8 minutes we have, if possible.
Okay.
So, one last question. We were reading about the time that you were in Israel and the pirate radio were trying to a bit help with the peace process at the time. We were wondering if it really helped. And second of all, if you think that this out of box thinking initiative today could help with our global situation, and if you see any of it today.
Okay, a little bit of background. The Voix de la Paix, the Voice of Peace, the Kol Shalom was a radio station set up in the early 70s, again on a ship, just anchored off the coast of Tel Aviv in the 73, 74. It was set up by a guy called Abi Nathan, who ostensibly wanted to find a way of bringing the various warring factions, in particular the young people of the warring factions, together in the Middle East. And the situation then, IMA, was pretty much as it is today. The station basically produced the broadcast pop music. Most of the disc jockeys on the radio station were, like myself, English, as a kind of a lingua franca. I should probably say that to French students. And the idea was to sort of to get people to dialogue, if you like. Whether it succeeded, well, I think possibly I have to say that obviously you have to look at the news today to say that perhaps it didn't. Whether it had any influence, yeah, I think it probably did. Again, it was a radio station in the 70s was a big deal. A radio station doing something similar today wouldn't be. Now, what I would like to say at this point, though, is that I was talking before about disc jockeys being, back in the 70s, being sort of, teen heroes, if you like. They probably were or they weren't. Well, let's use a different word that is perhaps more relatable today. Let's say that we were influencers. You know, if the disc jockey on the radio, he played a record and say, "Hey, this is a great record," you believed him. You know, a good disc jockey was somebody that you trusted. You trusted his opinion, just as you may or may not trust the so-called influencers that we have today. So, whereas perhaps there's a case. Maybe some, maybe some of these influencers could perhaps do the kind of work that the Voice of Peace was trying to do beforehand. Maybe that's a little bit of a naive thing to think, but not a great deal to lose, I suppose. So out of the box thinking is certainly the way of resolving probably a lot of problems, because, you know, if everybody just sort of goes down the same road that everybody's been doing for the last 20 or 30 years, the results are all around us. So yes, I think every now and again, somebody that's, has a crazy idea is certainly worth listening to. Yeah, absolutely.
So we are done. Maybe we have 5 minutes.
Okay, I'm here.
If you want to add something, if not, I have a question. So they are
Go on.
studying journalism, right? And maybe you want
Right.
to spend 4 minutes to talk about journalists inside the radio station. If they, how do you see them as a possible path?
I think that journalism inside a radio is the way forward, because I think, I was always a big fan of music radio. That was my background. I've done a little bit of journalism, but nothing really serious. Just basically when there was nobody else around to do it. So I think spoken content is ever more important in radio. Call it radio, call it podcasting, call it what you will. At the end of the day, it's audio. It's an audio message. So certainly, I think that, absolutely. At the end of the day, where do people listen to the radio? They listen to it in the car. They listen to it while they're doing something else, visually. So obviously the role of an audio journalist is absolutely important. It's again, it gives me an excuse to promote Radio Morcotti again. One of the things that I've noticed with Radio Morcotti is that we set out as basically a music radio station, but I realized that to be taken seriously, to have any impact on our local area, we have to have journalistic input. And so the last couple of weeks, ironically, I've been putting together a newsroom, redazione, a newsroom here in Switzerland, basically of young journalists, with 1 or 2 people that have experience so that they can help the others, and we're creating a news service that will give some gravitas, which will give some credence to the rest of the radio station. I think a station that doesn't have some form of information service is not will not have the same sort of impact that one that does have. It's as simple as that. I mean, information obviously can take many different forms. It can be just some simple banal stuff, what's on, traffic, but people want to know what's going on. I think more today, more so than ever. I think the problem that we have slightly now is that there are so many sources that to find a credible source requires a lot of input from the user as well. Whereas once upon a time, we used to sit back and listen to the BBC, whereas now we have to lean forward and use a little bit of our own brain as well. So I think that again, like for a music presenter like myself, the work of a journalist is going to become harder as well, to make yourself known, to prove that you're a worthy and a trustworthy source of news, which is obviously what news is all about. If you lose your credibility, that's very, very difficult. So yeah, I admire you guys getting into to journalism, whatever form, whether it be print, television. Print obviously is no longer probably print journalism is the one that really is going. But again, it's just changing its form. Previously it was printed on paper. Now it's printed on the screen in front of me. At the end of the day, they're words. And yeah, absolutely. No, good luck to you guys. Seriously.
Thank you.
So thank you, Grant.
Thank you so much.
Je vous en prie. Bye bye, guys. Enjoy. Listen, I hope that the weather down your way on the Côte d'Azur is a little bit better than it is up here in Ticino, because here it's sunny, but it's very, very cold.
It's the same. It's 4 Celsius in the morning. Can you believe it?
Blimey. Yeah, well, it's 16 here in Ticino now, but yeah, there you go. Okay, well, listen, it's been great talking to you guys. Please, if you ever want me to bore you to tears about anything else, let me know. I'm happy to do so. Okay.
Ciao, thank you.
Ciao,
Thank you.
grazie, buon giornée. Bye bye.
Ciao.